Okay, so you want to own a trucking company. A few semi-trucks with your logo running down, I-40, drivers radioing in every delivery, freight flowing your way all week long. Invoices at $3 or $4 per mile hit your bank account every Friday. That's the plan in your head, and honestly, it doesn't sound like a bad plan at all. Drive past any interstate at rush hour, and it looks like the easiest business in America. Every lane packed with rolling money, wheels turning around the clock nonstop. Here's the problem. A trucking company is not really a transportation business. It is a cash flow gap business that just happens to move freight around for a living. In August 2023, one of America's largest trucking chains collapsed with $737 million in debt. And it wasn't because they ran out of freight to haul. Now, before we get to what really kills a trucking company, we need to talk about what kind of trucking company you are actually building. Because trucking is not one business. It is at least four completely different businesses that share the same highway and the same diesel pump. Each one has its own math, its own margins, and its own way of quietly destroying new owners who confused motion with profit. The first is long haul, over the road, what the industry calls off the record. This is the picture in your head. Trucks running coast to coast, drivers gone for weeks. Margins here are the thinnest in the entire industry, roughly 4 to 7% in a good year, before anything unexpected happens. And in trucking, something unexpected always happens. Weather, breakdowns, rate collapses, driver quits, detention time at a receiver that eats your legal driving hours. The second is regional or dedicated lanes. Same trucks, same drivers, but running fixed routes for a single shipper on a multi-year contract. Margins climb to 8, sometimes 10%. That sounds better, and it is better. The problem is that these contracts almost never go to newcomers. Shippers hand dedicated lanes to carriers with 5 years of clean CSA safety scores, audited financials, and a track record they can call and verify. The third is LTL, less than truckload. This is the world of hubs, terminals, and freight moving in pieces across a distribution network. It is capital intensive in a way most people never see. Terminals cost tens of millions of dollars each. You need dozens of them just to compete. This is exactly the business Yellow Corporation was in, and it is exactly the business that ate them alive. Remember that name? Because we are coming back to it. The fourth is owner-operator. One truck, one driver, usually the owner. This is where roughly 90% of new entrants start, because the barrier looks low. Buy a truck, get authority, start running loads. On paper, it looks like the simplest business model in America. In reality, it is the fastest way to lose your savings. While working 90 hours a week for less than minimum wage per hour actually worked after you count all the unpaid time. Each of these four models has different capital requirements, different cash conversion cycles, and different failure modes. Mixing up which one you are running is one of the most common mistakes. So let's talk about that entry cost, what everybody knows, what the calculator in your kitchen already told you before you started dreaming. A new Class 8 sleeper truck runs between $150,000 and $200,000, depending on engine spec and cabin trim. A dry van trailer, another $40,000 to $60,000. A reefer trailer, closer to $70,000 or $80,000 because of the refrigeration unit. Add a used tractor and used trailer, and you might get in for $120,000 total. Bank financing available, of course. Then there is the operating authority. Filing with the FMCSA, getting your MC and DOT numbers, UCR registration, IFTA licensing, IRP plates. Roughly $3,000 to $5,000 in paperwork and filing fees before your wheels ever move a mile down the road. None of this is optional. Miss any of it, and your first roadside inspection ends with your truck parked and your authority suspended, sometimes permanently on the second offense. Then there is the surety bond. A BMC 8-4 broker bond, if you plan to broker any freight, runs $75,000 in coverage. Then insurance. And this is where the numbers really start to hurt, in a way the calculator on your kitchen table failed to warn you about. A new authority in long-haul trucking pays $12,000 to $18,000 per truck per year for primary liability, cargo, and physical damage. New entrants pay the top of that range because they have no safety record and no loss history for underwriters to trust in the first place. One at-fault accident, and that annual premium doubles overnight. 2 accidents in your first 3 years, and most insurers simply refuse to renew you. Your business ends not with a bankruptcy filing, but with a canceled policy, and absolutely no options to replace it anywhere in the market. Then there is maintenance. Diesel engines are marvels of durability, but they are also $15,000 to rebuild when they finally give up. Tires run $600 each, 10 to 18 tires per truck. Brakes, DPF filters, DEF systems, coolant swaps. Industry data puts maintenance at 15 to 20 cents per mile. A truck running 120,000 miles a year burns $18,000 to $24,000 in repairs. Every year, without fail. That is not a maintenance budget. That is a tax on staying in the business at all. Add in fuel, which we will get to in a moment, and the driver's salary if it is not you behind the wheel yourself. And your total operating cost per mile lands somewhere between $1.70 and $2.20. Which brings us to revenue. Spot market rates in 2026 sit around $2.50 to $3 per mile for dry van freight. Refrigerated pulls a little more, flatbed a little more still. Specialized heavy haul can pull $5 per mile if you have the equipment and permits. So on paper, your margin is roughly 30 cents to 80 cents per mile. Multiply by 120,000 miles a year, and you get somewhere between $36,000 and $96,000 a year per truck on paper. Read that again. On paper. That sounds workable. That sounds livable. That is the math every new owner-operator does on a legal pad before quitting their W-2 job. And it is exactly the math that gets them killed within 18 months, when the difference between on-paper margin and cash check margin finally shows up. Because here is where the naive mental model starts to break down, and where the real business of trucking begins to reveal itself. Fuel is not a fixed cost. Fuel is a variable cost that moves against you in ways no other business has to deal with directly. And the mechanism the industry invented to protect you from that variability, called the fuel surcharge, does not actually protect you at all. The truck is the easy part. The truck is always the easy part. Now let's talk about the real business of trucking, the one that isn't in any textbook and isn't on the pitch deck of any freight coach on YouTube. When you own a trucking company, you do not get paid when you deliver a load. You get paid, if you are lucky, 40 to 60 days after you deliver. That is the industry standard payment window for shippers and brokers, called DSO, Days Sales Outstanding. And in trucking, DSO is not a metric. It is a survival threshold. Because here is the problem. Your costs do not wait 40 to 60 days to arrive at your bank account. Fuel is paid weekly, sometimes daily. Driver salary is paid weekly. Truck payments are monthly. Insurance is monthly, if to quarterly. Everything you owe arrives on a much faster clock than everything you are owed. And nobody on the receiving side of your invoice cares about that mismatch. This mismatch between when money leaves and when money arrives is called the cash flow gap. And it is not a bug in the trucking business model. It is the trucking business model itself, dressed up in 18 wheels and a diesel engine. Read that again. Every dollar of revenue you generate exists in a ghost state for 6 to 8 weeks before it becomes real money you can spend on real fuel. Meanwhile, you have already burned that fuel, paid that driver, and financed that trailer. The math does not add up unless something bridges the gap. And this is where factoring companies enter the story. Because factoring is the invisible engine that keeps roughly 70% of small trucking fleets alive from week to week. A factoring company buys your invoices from you the day you send them out. Instead of waiting 45 days for the shipper to pay $100,000, you get $96,500 in your account tomorrow morning. The factoring company takes their 3.5% and takes on the collection risk, 3.5%. That sounds small. That sounds like a reasonable price for solving a cash flow problem you cannot solve any other way. Here is the problem. Your margin on that $100,000 of freight, before factoring, was somewhere between $5,000 and $7,000, which means factoring just took $3,500, or between 50 and 70% of your actual profit, in exchange for showing up early with your own money. Read that again. Factoring eats over half your profit. And this is not a bug. This is a feature of how the entire industry was built. Now, here is the trap inside the trap. Because if you do not factor, you have to wait 45 days for that $100,000. And during those 45 days, you still owe your driver, your fuel bill, your truck payment, and your insurance premium on loads you have already delivered. For most new owner-operators, the choice is not between factoring or not factoring. The choice is between factoring or shutting down within 90 days. Which is why the following statement is technically true, and why it explains almost everything about who survives in trucking and who does not. A trucking company that does not use factoring goes bankrupt faster than one that does, on average, in the first 2 years of operation. So if freight rates are high, why do trucking companies still fail? Because rates were never the real number. The real number is the spread between what you get paid, when you get paid, and what you owe, when you owe it. And the person who controls that spread is not you. It is the shipper, the broker, and the factoring company in that exact order. Let me put a number on it, because this is the whole game right here. In one paragraph, in one calculation you should tape to your monitor. You gross $100,000 in revenue for the month. Your operating cost, including fuel and driver and maintenance, comes out to $93,000. Your on-paper margin is 7%. $7,000. This is the number every trucking coach on YouTube points at when they call the industry a gold mine. Now subtract factoring at 3.5% of gross. $3,500. Your real margin, in cash, in your bank account, is $3,500. On $100,000 of revenue, your real take-home margin is 3.5%, which is roughly what a high-yield savings account paid in 2024. Except a savings account does not require you to work 80 hours a week driving in blizzards or sleep in a bunk behind the driver's seat, and personally guarantee $200,000 in truck loans against your house. This is the moment when most new owners realize what they actually signed up for. Brokers sometimes offer quick pay, faster payment for an extra fee, 2% to get paid in 7 days instead of 45, another 1% gone. Between the broker's cut, the quick pay fee, and the factoring line, a small trucking company can hand over 10% of gross revenue before the truck even hits the ramp. There is a phrase old trucking owners use. They say the wheels are always turning, but the money is always sleeping. Someone else's payment terms decide whether you eat this month. Someone else's accounts payable department decides whether you make payroll next Friday. Large fleets do not have this problem. A carrier with 10,000 trucks negotiates net 30 terms with major shippers, waives factoring entirely, and finances its float directly with commercial banks. Small carriers have no leverage. You take the terms Home Depot dictates, or you do not haul Home Depot freight. There is no third option in the middle, which means the cash flow gap is not just a math problem, it is a power problem. And whoever holds the timing holds the margin, and whoever holds the margin holds the industry. Freight is the cover charge. The load, the miles, the delivery, the whole ballet of steel and rubber and asphalt is just the cover charge. Cash flow timing is what makes you wealthy in this industry, or breaks you completely. Everything else on the highway is just theater performed for the general public. Now let's talk about the second layer of hidden cost. The one that separates people who quit in the first year from people who last 3. Fuel is where most new owners get their first real, expensive education in how the trucking industry actually works from the inside. On paper, fuel is passed through to the shipper via a mechanism called the fuel surcharge. The theory is simple, elegant, and completely wrong in practice. Every Monday, the Department of Energy publishes an average diesel price. Shippers use that DOE number to calculate a per-mile surcharge on top of your base freight rate. If diesel goes up 10 cents this week, your surcharge goes up 10 cents this week. In theory, you never lose money on fuel. In theory, fuel is invisible. Here is what nobody tells you. The DOE number is always 5 to 7 days behind the actual pump price at Pilot or Love's or TA, which means when diesel is rising, you are burning today's fuel at today's price, but getting reimbursed at last week's price on last week's invoice. Over a full year of rising fuel prices, this timing lag can cost a single truck between $500 and $800 per week. That is $30,000 to $40,000 per truck per year. Gone, not stolen. Just quietly evaporated between the pump and the invoice. And if you run 5 trucks, that is your entire family's living expenses for a year, disappeared into a mechanism you probably did not know existed. Now let's talk about deadhead, empty miles. Miles where you are burning fuel and running down your engine to get to your next paying load. Industry data puts deadhead at 10 to 25% of total miles for most owner-operators, which means for every 4 miles you drive, 1 mile earns you nothing. You still burn fuel on that mile. You still put wear on your engine, your tires, your brakes. You still count against your legal driving hours. But no shipper pays you a single cent for it. That mile lives on your operating cost side of the ledger, invisible on your revenue side. Which means when a broker offers you $3 per mile on a load, you have to mentally discount it by your average deadhead percentage. A $3 per mile load with 20% deadhead is really a $2.40 load once you spread the empty miles across the paid ones. New owner-operators almost never do this math. They chase the highest headline rate and lose money on the deadhead they had to run to get there. This is one of the most consistent findings in trucking failure data. High rates plus high deadhead almost always lose to lower rates plus low deadhead. Now, about hours of service. Since December 2017, Every commercial truck in the United States has been required to run an electronic logging device called an ELD. The ELD talks directly to the engine control module. It knows exactly when your wheels are turning and exactly how long you have been driving. Federal rules cap you at 11 hours of driving per day, 14 hours total on duty, with a mandatory 10 hours off before your next shift begins. Before ELDs, drivers kept paper logs. Paper logs were, let's be honest, creative. Drivers routinely drove 12, 13, sometimes 15 hours a day in a single push. After ELDs, that stopped completely, and the industry has never fully adjusted. Revenue per truck dropped roughly 8 to 12% industry-wide in the 2 years after the mandate. That drop was not because there was less freight. That drop was because trucks physically could no longer run as many miles per week as they used to. The ELD did not just change how many hours drivers work. It permanently changed how much a single truck can earn in a given week. And the ratchet effect is one way. No amount of freight demand can put those hours back. The paper log era is over, and with it, an entire pricing model. Which brings us to load boards. DAT, truckstop.com. The digital marketplaces where brokers post loads and carriers bid on them. Load boards look like a fair market. Anyone can post, anyone can bid, the best rate wins. This is the story the load board companies want you to believe. Here is the reality. Brokers take a commission on every load they post, typically 15 to 20% of the total gross rate paid by the shipper. You never see that commission. You only see the rate the broker offers you, which is the shipper's rate minus the broker's cut, minus the broker's overhead. The same load, run direct with the shipper, would pay you 30 to 50% more per mile. But direct shipper relationships take years to build, which is why 90% of new owner-operators live on the load board, working essentially as subcontractors for brokers who never own a single truck themselves. None of this shows up in the pitch decks freight coaches sell for $499 a month. None of it appears on the load board welcome page. It only appears in your bank statement, 6 months in, when you finally understand that the mile you were paid for is not the mile you actually earned. Now, here's where the psychology becomes just as important as the math, and where new owners start to make the mistakes that end their careers. New owner-operators consistently pick the wrong loads for the wrong reasons. They see a $350 per mile load in one direction and jump on it. They ignore that the load takes them to a low-density freight market, where they will deadhead 200 miles to find their next loadout. Meanwhile, a $280 per mile load in the other direction goes to a high-density market with a paid backhaul available within 40 miles. The second load nets more money. Every experienced dispatcher knows this. Every new owner-operator learns it the hard way. One bad week at a time. Then there is the psychology of gross versus net. New owners see the number on their factoring statement, the deposit hitting their account, and feel wealthy. They forget that the deposit already had fuel subtracted, factoring subtracted, sometimes the truck payment auto-deducted. What lands in the account is not profit. It is float. 6 months later, when the maintenance bill hits, when the tire blowout happens, when the insurance renewal doubles, the float turns out to be someone else's money. That is when the truck goes back to the dealer. That is when the authority gets surrendered. That is when the FMCSA data adds one more line to its failure statistics. Which brings us to Yellow Corporation. Because you cannot understand the economics of trucking without understanding what happened to Yellow in August 2023. Yellow was 99 years old. Founded in 1924, it was one of the oldest trucking companies in the United States. 30,000 employees at its peak. 300 terminals across the country. The third largest less-than-truckload carrier in North America. A company so central to the freight economy, the federal government called it too important to fail. In August 2023, Yellow filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. $737 million in debt. Every truck parked, every terminal shuttered, every employee laid off. Now here is the part that makes the Yellow story worth studying. Because Yellow's collapse was not a mystery, and it was not sudden, and it was not unfair. Yellow died from exactly the three forces we have been describing for the last 30 minutes. Slow motion, in full view of the entire industry, over more than a decade. Cause number 1, debt from bad acquisitions. In 2003, Yellow bought Roadway Express for $1.1 billion. In 2005, USF Corporation for another $1.4 billion. Both deals were financed with debt, and both deals were pitched to shareholders as consolidation that would create efficiency and pricing power in the LTL market. The efficiency never fully materialized. The debt never fully went away. And the interest payments quietly ate at the company's margins for the next 20 years. Cause number 2, union pension liabilities. Yellow was a Teamster carrier, which meant it participated in Central State's pension fund, one of the most underfunded multi-employer pensions in America. When Central States ran into trouble in the 2010s, Yellow's contribution requirements rose dramatically. And unlike a non-union carrier, Yellow could not simply cut those contributions to save itself. The pension was contractually locked in. Every dollar of relief the company negotiated in one contract cycle got clawed back in the next round of Teamster negotiations. Cause number 3, and the one we care about most, the cash flow gap. Yellow's customers, retailers, and manufacturers paid on standard 60 and 90-day terms. Yellow's costs, fuel, driver payroll, terminal utilities, truck payments, pension contributions arrived weekly and monthly, exactly like every other trucking company we have already discussed. During the 2020 pandemic, Yellow received a $700 million loan from the United States Treasury under the CARES Act, structured as a national security emergency. Because Yellow moved military freight, the loan was labeled critical infrastructure. It ended up bridging exactly 3 years of continued losses, at which point the money finally ran out. Yellow did not die from a lack of freight. In 2022, freight demand was at a 15-year high. Rates were strong, volumes were strong. Yellow was still losing money. Yellow died from what always kills a trucking company: running out of cash between when the invoice was mailed and when the check finally arrived. The $737 million debt figure is what the bankruptcy filing showed. But the real killer was much simpler than that headline number. Yellow simply could not pay its bills in the week the bills were due, because its customers had not paid theirs yet. Same story, same industry, same ending. Yellow was not the first American trucking giant to go under this way. Consolidated Freightways collapsed in 2002, Central Transport in 2015, Celadon in 2019. Every one of them died in the same pattern: growing revenue, thin margins, aggressive debt-financed growth, and a cash flow structure that finally broke when a downturn extended payment terms by an extra 30 days. That is the whole story of Yellow. Compressed into a single paragraph, it is the whole story of every carrier that has ever gone under, from Consolidated Freightways to Celadon. You would think the industry would learn. It does not. Because every generation of new owners is separately optimistic that this time they will be different. Now let's do the math for you. The new owner in 2026 with dreams of 5 trucks and a small regional operation. 2 scenarios. Scenario 1, optimistic. You landed a dedicated regional contract with a mid-sized distributor. 2 years, fixed lanes, predictable freight, 5 trucks each running 120,000 miles. At $3 per mile, that is $360,000 gross per truck. $1.8 million total across 5 trucks in a year. Operating costs, including fuel, driver wages, maintenance, insurance, factoring, and truck payments, come to $1.62 million. Your on-paper profit is $180,000. Subtract taxes, subtract owner draw. Subtract the unexpected repair that happens every 9th month like clockwork, and your real take-home lands between $90,000 and $120,000. Doable, not glamorous. Roughly what a solid W-2 job pays, without the 90-hour weeks and the personal guarantees against your house. Scenario 2, realistic. You did not land the dedicated contract because no shipper hands one to a brand new authority. You are running spot market freight through load boards. Same 5 trucks, same 120,000 miles per year. But your average rate, after deadhead adjustments and broker cuts, drops to $2.50 per mile. That is $300,000 gross per truck, $1.5 million total. Your operating costs, unchanged, still come to $1.55 million. You lost $50,000 in year 1. And you cannot cut costs, because everything in trucking is a variable cost that moves with volume. More importantly, you lost $50,000 of borrowed money secured against your house, your equipment loans, and your personal guarantee on the trucks themselves. Year 2, you either found dedicated contracts or you did not. Statistically, you did not. According to the FMCSA, roughly 85% of new motor carrier authorities fail within 3 years. Not because they are lazy, not because they are unskilled, but because the business model requires perfect execution across cost control, cash flow, and shipper relationships all at once. Very few people can execute that well when they are also driving 11 hours a day and sleeping in a bunk. Yellow could not do it with 99 years of history. You will not do it either, unless you understand exactly what business you are actually in from the first mile you ever drive under your own authority. So the next time you drive past a truck stop on the interstate and see 100 rigs parked with engines idling in the pre-dawn dark, understand what you are looking at. You are not looking at an army of small businesses hauling America's freight from coast to coast. You are looking at an army of small businesses financing that freight, paying the fuel bill 6 weeks before their customers pay them for the delivery, bridging the gap with a factoring company that takes half their profit for the privilege, absorbing every rise in diesel price the DOE index cannot keep up with, every empty mile the load board hides, every insurance renewal the safety score just doubled. The wheels are the cover charge. Just like the cattle on a ranch, just like the treadmills in a gym, the wheels are the visible part of an invisible business. They are the part that makes the industry look simple to anyone driving past on the interstate at rush hour with the sun setting over the freight lanes. But the real business is not moving freight. The real business is surviving the gap between the miles you drive and the money that finally arrives in your account. A trucking company doesn't make money by moving freight. It makes money by surviving the gap between the wheels turning and the money arriving. The wheels are the cover charge. The cash flow is what makes you wealthy, or breaks you completely. Everything else on the interstate is just theater.